Gas prices are up nearly 48% in just over a year. At the same time, interest rates are up nearly 2% in just a few short months. So that means we have to have a housing crash, right? That's what everyone is saying online. So in today's video, I want to spend a little bit of time and talk about supply and demand. Now, I'm going to ask a favor very early in the video that you watch this video in its entirety. I'm going to talk about 5 different things that could affect supply that could ultimately cause a change in the housing market. We're going to talk about everything from foreclosures to new construction, from new supply to diminishing buyer demand, and lastly, global turmoil, some black swan event that could ultimately affect supply and demand, which could, in theory, crash the housing market. Now, if you watch my videos at all, I do believe a change is coming because of the things that I mentioned early in this video. Gas prices rising, home prices rising, interest rates rising. I do believe that means a change is on the way. But that does not mean a crash is coming, and it definitely doesn't mean that you're going to see some big reduction in home prices. So I want to spend a little bit of time today and talk about supply and demand. Economics 101. When you have very little of something and a lot of people want it, it drives prices of that said good, in this case houses, the value of houses up. So what could change buyer demand and or supply to change that equation? And that's what we're going to dive into in today's video. My name is Jeb Smith. I'm a real estate broker here in Southern California, and everyone says, well, you're a real estate broker, your job is to sell houses, so you're just going to talk about how great the housing market is. No, not at all. My goal with this video is to educate, inform you so that you can make sensible decisions, the right decision for you. It's not always a great time to buy a house. And in fact, right now might be one of those times where you question whether or not it's the right time to buy a house, depending on your life situation and all of the other things that we talk about in different videos. But I want to start today's video and talk about foreclosures. That is one of the main topics, main points that people want to talk about when talking about what's going to change the housing market. Is foreclosures are going to come on the market, it's going to create all this new supply, and the value of homes is going to become less expensive because of this influx of property. Well, not going to happen. For one, the average homeowner has $184,000 of tappable equity in their property. That means the large majority of homeowners out there have a lot of equity in their property, meaning if they need to sell it, it's not a distressed sell, it's a market value sell. That property goes on the market and it sells at market value. But you're going to say, well, what about the headlines where foreclosures are up, 100% from this time last year? Okay, well, last year we couldn't have any foreclosures at all. There will be some foreclosures coming to the market. In fact, the latest data from January shows that there were nearly 23,000 foreclosure filings in the month of January. That's nationwide. Now, keep in mind, we're currently behind about 5.5 million units short with regards to supply of homes. So 23,000 homes isn't really going to do much to affect that number. In fact, if we had 23,000 foreclosure filings every single month for an entire year, that's just short of 300,000 foreclosure filings. Not really a dent in the big picture of the amount of homes we need coming to the market. And keep in mind, any foreclosure coming to our current real estate market, with a low supply and high buyer demand, is likely to sell at market value. So if you're one of those people sitting on the sidelines waiting for foreclosures to happen, yeah, some are going to happen, but many of them are going to sell for market value because of the lack of supply and buyer demand, which is going to take us into our next point, new construction. If you look at the headlines, housing permits are up, housing starts are up, the highest level we've seen in a year. Great, but how many of those homes are actually finishing construction? How many of them are completing the final stages of construction? It's one thing to say permits are pulled on a property. It's another thing to say it's actually finished. At the moment, there are many bottleneck scenarios going on across the United States with regards to supplies, with regards to a lack of workers, with regards to many different factors that's impacting the cost of construction, which is impacting the completion of this new construction. Now, many new developments out there are going to happen, and it's going to increase supply. but is it going to increase supply enough to actually change the market dynamic? Because nothing changes, absolutely nothing changes in the housing market unless supply increases and buyer demand drops off at the same time. You can't have buyer demand slowing and supply not increasing. Otherwise, you're in the same exact scenario. And that's what we've been experiencing for the last couple of months. On average, we build around 1.5 million homes per year. And in order to meet the current demand that is needed out there, you have to build around 2.1 million homes per year. That's about 500,000, 600,000 more homes per year for an entire decade to keep up with what's actually needed to meet the current demand. So at the moment, new construction isn't going to be the missing piece of the puzzle. Now, keep in mind, real estate's local. So if you're in a market that has a ton of new construction, say you're in Texas, in an area that has a ton of new construction, new housing developments, in your market, it's probably going to be a little bit different than say here in Southern California, where I am by the coast, where there's no land to build. Every project that comes up is in infill development. So very little construction is actually happening. In fact, it's a very small piece of the puzzle where I am. So new construction isn't going to be the piece that solves the puzzle. Foreclosures aren't going to be the piece that solves the puzzle. And next thing, let's talk about sellers. Sellers out there considering selling their homes at the moment. Many of them have been sitting on the sidelines for months, waiting for the right property to come on the market so they can list their home for sale. And until they see that property, they're going to stay off market. In fact, I know many sellers that are in that exact same scenario. They've been sitting on the sidelines for months, in some cases years, waiting for the right property to come on so that they can list their home for sale. And since then, we've seen home prices rise. At the same time, we've seen interest rates rise. Here in Orange County, where I'm located, it's about 30% more expensive this year compared to last year to own the exact same home because home prices have increased substantially. At the same time, interest rates have increased substantially. And this was back when interest rates were around 3.75, 3.875%. That's where I got the 30% number. So the fact that interest rates are at 4.625% for many home buyers out there at the moment, it's probably now 31, 32, maybe even 33% more expensive to own that same home. So sellers selling their properties probably isn't going to create the supply that you need because many of those sellers that would sell also have to buy something else. Even if they become a move down buyer and buy something smaller, they still have to buy something else. There's not many sellers out there that are just going to go sell their property and rent something. Now, a percentage of the population will do exactly that. They'll sell their property, they'll go rent something for a period of time, but the majority of sellers out there are going to sell their property and need to purchase something else. So sellers selling their property isn't going to create the supply that many people out there want to see because of how much more expensive it is to buy that next property. Now, let's talk about buyers not buying. So if buyers decide not to buy, so demand drops, that could create more supply, right? But is it enough supply to actually change the environment as a whole to where we would see big, huge price reductions across the board? I don't personally believe so. In fact, at the moment, you have buyer demand diminishing. It is backing off from highs because of rising cost of gas, rising cost of food, inflation, if you will, and also affordability issues. Because home prices have gotten so expensive, there are buyers priced out of the market. So buyer demand is dropping. But what we're seeing at the same time is supply levels are also dropping at the same time. You know, there's a quote that says, rising tides lift all boats. In this case, if the tide goes down, all boats go down together. And in this case, those boats are buyers and potential sellers. So as buyer demand backs off, I don't think you see a huge increase in supply because, again, a lot of those potential sellers are also buyers. And if they don't see property out there to buy, they're not sellers. And also, they're looking at costs, seeing how much more expensive it is to own that same property and thinking, you know what? I don't really need to move. I'll just stay put. So with that said, I don't believe buyer demand backing off is going to add a huge amount of supply to the market. It is going to give buyers more options to choose from. But if you're going from a market at the moment that has 10, 20 buyers on, any given listing, which is essentially what's happening in my market on my last couple of listings. We've had 21, 22 buyers on the last 2 that I've listed. Well, if you have less buyer demand and inventory stays exactly the same, well, instead of having 20 active buyers, maybe you have 10. And at the end of the day, all it takes is 2 buyers to have a multiple offer situation where 2 people are bidding against each other. So you don't need a huge amount of buyer demand to keep a market moving strong, which is going to take me into my last topic, which is global turmoil. And we've seen a lot of that happening over the last couple of months with regards to Russia, with regards to Ukraine. Obviously, there is global turmoil happening, which is raising inflation costs, raising costs across the board. But even those global issues aren't changing the supply and demand imbalance here in the United States. Now, at the end of the day, we never know what's going to happen with regards to war, and if Putin decides to use a nuke, and if that does happen, then I don't think we really care about home prices and home values anyway. But the only thing I could see happening that could change the dynamic of the market in the short term is some black swan event that no one is even considering. So if you're sitting there on the sidelines wondering or waiting for this big decline in home prices, I want to know where it's going to come from. What is actually going to increase that supply? Because you've had rising rates, you've had rising costs, you've had affordability become more of an issue. And because supply is not really changing, the market continued to move full steam ahead. So at the moment, you do have that supply and demand imbalance that we've talked about. And until you see supply rise significantly, you're not going to see a change in the housing market. So this is where I want to ask another favor. After you hit the like button, you subscribe to the channel, I want you to comment below. Let me know where that inventory is going to come from. Where is this huge excess amount of property going to come to the market that's going to change the market in its entirety and create this huge amount of supply where sellers can't get out of their homes at the current values and have to lower their prices so much to be able to sell those homes. The only way that happens is some huge increase in supply. So I want you to tell me where that's going to come from. A lot of you are commenting on my videos, and I appreciate you being here and the support you've given me, but this conversation is one that I have with a lot of real estate agents, a lot of very smart people. I do a lot of reading, and so far I haven't had anyone be able to tell me where this huge increase in supply is going to come from. So I'd love to know your thoughts on that supply in the comments below. Now, earlier in the video, I did mention it's not always a great time to buy a house. In fact, you need to have your ducks in a row if you're planning on buying a house. So if you are watching this and all of that made sense and you don't think the market's going to crash, and you're thinking you want to buy a home but not sure where to start, or should you buy now or wait, do me a favor, check out this video here. I dive into it in more detail, but for now, I appreciate you taking the time to watch. I appreciate the support. Hope to see you again soon. Have a great day. Bye-bye.